presentation will take you, well, it touches a general issue which has been mentioned in our presentation in the keynotes, that it's a key importance of resources. It's nice to have INTA commitment frameworks and everything, but if there are no resources to implement them, it's not effective or difficult. I will take you to a region that is, well, that understands itself, if you ask the key political stakeholders, as a best practice example, where there is spread a narrative that we are so good, everybody can learn from us, including Russia and Ukraine. Where, I mean, we had this morning, it was mentioned too, the Danish-German case, as a rather meat hack. I think it was a media case, saying, well, it doesn't meet all the doesn't meet all the final criteria of NTA. It's more like a working model with some NTA criteria and some not, and it was considered to be mediocrely effective, like not super effective, but mediocrely effective. So next slide. The framework this is in is, of course, multiculturalism, liberal multiculturalism. Kumitska is again, what does he use, Kumitska or Kumitka? I never understand Kumitka. I would always say Kumitska, which is a Slavic name. But for these states in the US or was. So this is about this idea of culturalism, like the necessity that this assumption that we cannot be happy when we have a cultural framework to relate to, when we feel at home. I wouldn't always say I agree with it, but it's a pretty strong element also on minority self-identification in the Danish boundary. This idea, or especially also in Denmark, this idea that you have to be rooted, firmly deeply rooted in one national culture to be happy, and only then you can be open to other cultures. Arguing multiculturalism is controversial, but then of course liberal society, liberal multiculturalism, which means that liberal, or meaning that there is that groups have or that a liberal society has to protect some groups and their linguistic cultural rights, and where Kumitska argues that it's actually, I mean, culture is a very broad term. What he talks about is cultural structure, meaning the features that actually outline or that make it possible for people to have practical actions in a cultural process. And Kumitska names basic features as shared language, history, and geography. And therefore, we can always argue what is really a shared language, what is a shared history, shared geography. I will not go into detail, but I mean the shared geography in physics is actually also very interesting because it's not really shared. It's actually the geographical divide is in Swiss and one north south, but the national divide. Or the national divide in physics does not reflect the shared geography. Next slide, please. It's of course this recognition-based approach as a central element that recognition of the value of cultural memberships for individuals as a requirement for self-respect. So that you are kind of recognized as saying, I want to be have a different cultural affiliation as a majority. This is a very important part in Schleswig, and I will get back to this also. And then of course this must be that multiculturalism, like this reflecting, recognizing different cultures, must be incorporated in politics of recognition. Also a redistribution of power and voice of institutions to incorporate minority groups. But this has also probably mentioned before. But what I think is important here, also in my case and in others, is the role of history. This point of we have to have history in mind when we discuss and evaluate concept of NTA, because history here, especially how did a state acquire sovereignty over a specific territory and population? How come that this region now is ruled by Romania, by Russia, by Ukraine, by Denmark, or by Germany? Next, please. As a classic example, we have these one Copenhagen declarations. We had this issue about legal issues, how do you sort out NTA legally, what do you legal arrangements. The legal status of the Danish Dublin model is rather weak because there is neither a bilateral treaty nor a constitutional guarantee in the Danish and the federal German constitution, nor are there specific laws. No, it's actually true because there's no specific law on the minority. The issues of the minorities are mentioned basically in the laws of schooling and education, but otherwise not really. But there are two governmental declarations by the national Danish government and by the federal German government made in 1955, the year West Germany joined NATO, and it is connected to that discussion. And which were kind of top-down process for also pacifying a border conflict and a border issue, and then also guaranteeing minorities' right of recognition, so they were recognized, plus personal individual recognition, meaning that people could decide for themselves, personal framework, and also outlining a non-discrimination. They don't really talk about NTA, they talk about non-discrimination, and they talk about legitimacy of kin-state funding. So this model of kin-state funding was also institutionalized in 1955. This specific paragraph indicating that the minorities have a legitimate interest in cultural connection to the kin-state, and that it's perfectly legitimate too that the kin-state finances minority activities. This is what I want to focus today. What is the role of the kin-state compared or in relation to the state of residence when we talk about NTA, resources and minority, and so on? Because a model with heavy involvement of the kin-states can have a lot of implications. Next slide. Well, we have this is what I've actually mentioned before. We have the declarations. What we also have is, of course, that Denmark and Germany have ratified the relevant European legal frameworks, FCPN, ECR, the Charter of Regional Minority Language. We do have a constitutional protection now in the Constitution of the State of Schleswig-Holstein, which has been in place since 1990. Extended to the Roma rather late in the 2000s only. In the beginning, was only for the Danish minority and the Frisians. We have self-governing minority associations, institutions in the form of private law associations, so it's not a public body, and they are self-governing, but they have to work within the framework of national legislation of Germany. And then we have this mixture of kin-state, state of residence financing, which in practice means that about half of the actual costs of the Danish minority institution, politics, and so on is financed by Denmark, and about 30% of the institutional costs of the German minority in North Schleswig is financed by Germany. And what is also decided is that since 1955, when geopolitics was taken out of the Schleswig border question and the Schleswig concept, we have a development to a positive political climate, which and this is again, it was not a bottom-up, it was a top-down process. It means that the governments in Bonn and in Copenhagen decided we have to stop quarreling about the border and about who's minority, who's not, and so on. But we are allies now. Cold War, European integration, and so on. So there was a general top-down political will to make Denmark and Germany friends and to accommodate this minority. Next slide. History coming in, and we have the border has been moved around a bit. It's important that I mean this is like this moving from empire to nation state. The Danish Empire went all the way down to Hamburg, Holstein, and Schleswig were the German duchies within the Danish Empire. The Danish king was the ruler, but they were administered in German. This created a conflict about societal mobility in the 1800s. I would still argue it's not much about nationality, but societal mobility, because the language administration in this area, which was actually predominantly Danish-speaking, was German. And there was strong resistance among the German-speaking elite to change that. So the Danish ways to increase the power of the language were blocked by local administration, which then led to a national awakening. Eventually, when there was a war in 1864, with quite a few parallels to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, actually, without the detail, where Bismarck managed to secure the Bolsheviks to Germany, so the border was clear. In 1907, after 1864, the new 1807, until after the First World War, when there was implemented the plebiscite and a totally new border was drawn again. This is kind of interesting too, because it is one of the very, very, very few borders we have that were drawn with taking into account the people's vote, and also drawn from scratch. Like they did not use pre-existing administrative borders. So there was actually there were a lot of geographical and other considerations, but this was not this had not been an important administrative border before. It was only like county level. So it's like, whereas most of the other issues we have with borders in minorities in Europe and Central Asia and so on, they rely on borders that have been administrative borders and then became national borders. But history, taking into account history is important here because the self-conception in Schleswig-Holstein by the German speakers has always been this is a German territory. So it has always been a challenge. Has been a challenge of legitimacy on the German side to accept that some people here actually rather wanted to be Danish. The self-perception in the region here has always been we are actually Danish. We are speaking Danish and so on. And the German minority they don't speak German at home, they speak a local Danish dialect. But they want to belong to this bigger German culture here. So there has also been a lack of recognition in North Schleswig that these people were actually Germans. They were like called the Heimatschleswiger, the home Germans, meaning that they're not really Germans. They're like our Germans. And so there has been, and in history, a central element that has not been consensus in the majority societies, the dominant societies, to accept that there were different identifications. And then we have kin state policy. The kin state policy, and this is also again history. The border in 1920 was controversial. Not many people were not happy with it on both sides. And there was a strong movement in Flensburg, which ended southern border, to come to Denmark. And the Danish government did not want to take more from Germany than they could digest. It was a very sensitive position of a small country with a big neighbor, not to create any issue in the future, arguing that you want to have a border, but it should be based on the right of self-determination. And meaning that there were Danes, about 20% south of the border voted for Denmark in the plebiscite. So there were people who rather wanted to come to Denmark who were left behind. So from the very beginning, the Danish government had like a bad conscience and we deceived you. We didn't take you with us to Denmark. So they said, well, we will not forget you. And this is kind of the basis for kin state support, saying we will not forget you, that you have to continue living in Germany, so we will always support you. And of course, this whole kin state support and also this building up of an institutionalism of national minorities was also heavily involved by kin state associations, NGOs who channeled money across the border. And the same applies for the German minority. Next slide. But of course, this you shall not be forgotten. Is 100 years later, it is a little bit difficult to apply because who in the minority today can trace their roots back to 1920? Not many. And there has been a lot of mobility in the region, in and out, and back and forth. So there are some families that can, but most cannot. And so this argument has come somehow. It's controversial. In Denmark, Germany is not this big. In Germany, we have many minorities, and the German minority number is only one small minority of all the other German minorities. So there is not really any public discussion on funding the German minority. But in Denmark, it's the only minority they have. And so there is actually some discourse every 2-3 years. Why do we fund that minority? It doesn't still make sense with the you cannot be forgotten. And actually, what has come into the discussion discourse today is another interesting thing, what I would call a more neoliberal Kinsey policies. Is actually that this money is a good investment because Danes don't speak German anymore, and Germany is Denmark's biggest export market. This is very much down to earth, the argument. So if we invest in that minority, we will get people who are bilingual, higher education, and so on. If we can attract them to Denmark after they graduate from high school, or even before, this happens now, it's an increasing number of Danish minority youth actually move to Denmark at the age of 16. Finishing school in Denmark, or even 15, going to these special Danish boarding schools. This idea, let's attract them to the Danish labor market, and there have been studies that demonstrate, demonstrated that this is actually investment. That the annual supplement, which is about 70 million euros, that goes to the Danish minority, is reinvested by all these young Danes who get a higher education in Denmark and then pay back with their taxes, because they usually stay in Denmark. Border region is not an attractive place to be. Not so great career opportunities. So most of them, they marry somebody in Denmark and so on. I mean, there was a discussion in the minority argument about the right to self-determination. We should not give up that eventually we will come to Denmark in South Western too. And this is actually the core idea that we have. Which of course is a little bit old-fashioned. It happens in a different way now. The young minority is actually reunifying themselves with Denmark all the time because they move to Denmark and then marry there and integrate into the Danish majority Denmark population. Next slide. The issue that reveals a problem about this kin state minority was the 2010 conflict on the school budgets for the minority schools. 2010 is an aftermath of the financial crisis, the euro crisis, Greece, bailout of Greece. So, and suddenly Schleswig-Holstein, I mean, they knew that before, but suddenly Schleswig-Holstein realized too that their budget is not sustainable. About half or 50, I think in 2008, 60% of the Schleswig-Holstein state budget went to pensions and pensions for civil servants and to the debt service. I mean, at that time, we were not talking about 0.5 interest, but or cover rates. So the Schleswig-Holstein government said, well, so we don't want to end up as Greece, so we have to do something. So they made a big saving plan over the Pentecost weekend. There was like a clausur, so the whole government went to some nice place and discussing. And then they said, well, we have decided, among many other things, we also decided to cut the operational funding for the Danish minority schools from which was up at 100%, which had actually moved up. I mean, this was a long process too. It was not 100% from the beginning, but should have been put at 100% of average per pupil cost at public schools, indicating equity. This was always the big aim of the minority. We are citizens, we pay the same taxes, we want to have the same share of resources, down to 85%. And this was, of course, outrageous for the minority. It was not pretty anymore. We are less worth. But the argument used was that the Danish School Association had so much money because of the Kinsey project. Even with the 85%, they had still much larger funds than public schools. And the government presented a lot of studies that documented this. Going to beyond in detail, it's always very complicated. But the idea, and the picture I put here, this is the Danish high school in Schleswig. And Danish students, when it's graduation, so they always have the section when they graduate. And this was kind of used as an example to the Danish high school in Schleswig, opened in 2008, so shortly before. And it was privately funded by the Elke Møller Fund, which is like Maersk. biggest shipping company in the world, I think now. They have a fund, and this building was funded. It's just amazing. Pardon? Okay. It's almost an abstract. But there was, and this discussion was really running high. And suddenly everything came up, everything about political privilege of the minority, all kinds of issues suddenly were questioned. Starting with these 85%, it resulted in Danish-German crisis and so on. I mean, there have been quite a few articles written on that. We can check that out. To make the story short, it was like for 2 years, and there were elections, and the government changed, and they returned to the 100%. But it shows that this in-state financing, all these funds, that played an important role. And this idea of privileging minority. The financial resources are a key issue. Just before, but can it happen that a situation is so good in a minority-majority context that, and especially because of in-state funding, that the majority perceives the minority to be privileged, rightly or not? I can tell you actually quite a few reasons why they are privileged. I can also tell you some why they're not. But it is an important point. And I think this kind of said it is less about ensuring that like Vietnamese Americans get their pro-rated 0.6% of state funding for separate institutional services, and more about revising how the 99.4% is spent. And I think this shows again very well. It's not so much about looking at what the minority gets in state funds, but it's much more the point about looking at the idea of how do we finance minority. How responsible are we in accepting, recognizing this in the Schleswig case, tri-cultural, or even if you take the Roma, four cultural heritage region has, with Danish, Finland, and German, and how do we create a system that is kind of looking at this more as a whole and also allocating responsibility. I would argue the main conclusion of this example is that even in the best practice case, it's very important to look at a sound commitment to liberal multiculturalism from the state of residence, really accepting that there is a minority and also having a trickle down effect, not just in politics, but also into broader civilian society. Eventually, I would argue it is not the King state's responsibility to uphold a minority, but the state of residence. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your disclosure, Martin, and now we have time for.
Thank you. It's
Thank you for taking this question. Very interesting. I realized that I didn't go to the website, so I spent a year and a half. I actually wanted to ask you if you could tell us a little bit more about this for government declaration. How is the responsibility split between the home state and the king state? What would be the argument for allowing the king state basically to urban?
I mean, it is not split. It is not split. One Copenhagen only one country only states or only manifests that it is legitimate that the king celebrates. There is nothing about protest or potential shares or anything. It's only a manifestation that it's legitimate that the king says. The issue has been, I mean, it goes back to this history. I mean, and Bonn Copenhagen, but Bonn Copenhagen, I mean, was deliberately chosen not to have a treaty or any arrangement, basically because the Danish side felt they would never be on level playing field, arguing that Germany is a bigger country would always have would have less of a problem of blocking Danish complaints. The treaty was not fulfilled, and that on the other hand, the German government should interfere in German domestic affairs. So this is what the negotiations were about, because Germany originally wanted a treaty, but Denmark said no treaty. And this goes also back to history, and it's a long story, but the point was that the treaty would not be working in favor of Denmark. So this rather informal, with two declarations parallel, equal in the content, but a Danish declaration for the German minority and the German declaration for the Danish minority. And the issue of king state financing has played a role since the plebiscite. When in 1920, when it was argued, I mean, Germany had lost World War I, there was a severe food crisis, and Denmark was neutral, so they supplied material help. There was this continuous argument from the from 1920 until actually the 50s, or even later on, that Denmark is trying to buy souls by supporting the minority. And this is kind of playing a role here and also in this book. It's this idea they finance these fantastic institutions, the people who actually are German from Danish, join the minority. And if we take this school in Schleswig, Bjørn Kühl, who some of you might know, chairman of ECMI and also minority researchers, he has been the principal of the school, and in 2018 he made a little survey asking the last 3 years students, the 16, 17, 18-year-olds, whether their parents have been to a minority school or not, and it came out that only like 3% of the students had both parents, and another 30% had one parent with a minority school education, but 2/3 had not. So they both parents had a normal German school education, and this kind of reflects this argument. You have this fantastic new school, and people choose the school because it offers bilingual education, it offers access to the labor market, it offers easier access to Danish universities, including the state stipend. So it's again this material arguing that people choose the minority for material reasons and not because they're genuine Danes. And this is kind of a continuous discourse going back to 1920. But was never there the other way around, actually. Well, yes, no.
My first question is about a clarification. I'm about your finishing sentence. It is stating that, as far as I remember, NTA requires some commitment to interculturalism, recognition, and responsibility. So, what is your proposal about making this strong commitment tangible in practice? What do you mean by this? So
I would argue, yeah, this is of course where it becomes complicated. And we all agree that it's right. This is of course necessary, but this is where in fact it becomes complicated, and this touches the well in Europe. In Europe, it becomes complicated. I would not argue that it has to be complicated everywhere around the world, but in Europe, because the idea of the nation state as the core form of building the state is so deeply ingrained in Europeans. And the nation state requires a future language and it requires some kind of national homogenization. So there is always a centralizing national homogenization effect, which in a way interferes with this principle of liberal multiculturalism and minority support. So it's not easy. I would argue that, I mean, we heard that this morning too, that it's not enough to have the legal arrangements. But on the other hand, it can also be complicated if you don't have them. I mean, the school conflict here showed that it was quite complicated to find a legal base on revising the policy, which the minority considered in 2010-11 whether they should go to some court. arguing on the principle of equality, which is in the German basic law, arguing on with the FCA, PNM, and so on. And they had a lawyer who actually wrote them what was it called? An opinion where he believed that it could be successful, going to the Constitutional Court in Germany, or in Schleswig-Holstein, or both. But eventually the minority decided we will work for a political solution. There were elections were scheduled and arguing, well, let's try to mobilize support and then work for a political solution. So I would argue it's the legal document. It's important with the legal framework is good, but it's much more important to have a political will and to have a climate of recognition. This what Communica called recognition. That it's really that there is a full recognition of difference of other cultures being at home or having legitimate interest within a territory.
It's just about financial issues because you are writing focusing on to be funded. So the responsibility, how you identify responsibility of the King state, just including the financial issues and finance these minorities, it should be.
No, it's more. The financial issue is to demonstrate. I mean, this is finance resources are an issue, but it's more. I think that the example is supposed to demonstrate that resources alone, I mean, it's not enough. I mean, because the minorities in the Danish-German borderland have the resources compared to other situations, they cannot complain that they don't have the resources to maintain minority life or NTA, but it's actually much more than just resources. This is the sentence. I don't know. Can we have my last slide on again?
Because in the last sentence you say commitments, so.
It's quote I have here, which I think is very good. It's actually commitment, but commitment does not mean that you see or we have these resources which we give to you, so don't complain all the time, or you have the resources you need, but it's an idea of how we define ourselves as a state. And then organize the state and the way we use money. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.